Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in a case from SilentiumPC, and the name is a bit of a mouthful. It's the Ventum VT4V EVO TG ARGB. Now this case is currently on sale in the UK for only £55, and when you consider it's got a mesh front panel, it's got 4 ARGB fans, it's got a PWM fan hub, an ARGB hub all built into the case. So they're not normally features you'd expect to find in a £55 case. Also, when you consider I've used some of SilentiumPC's fans and coolers and was incredibly impressed with them, so I'm really excited for checking out this case in today's build. So let's take a look at the other parts I've chosen for today's build. For the motherboard, I've gone with ASRock's X570 Taichi Razer Edition. For the CPU, I've gone with AMD's Ryzen 9 5900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got an air cooler from SilentiumPC. It's the Fortis 5 ARGB. So I know what some of you are thinking, why am I using an air cooler on the 5900X? Would an AIO not be more appropriate? And you're probably right, but there's two reasons. The first is SilentiumPC have sent me out this cooler for the build, and the second is the 5900X is the only CPU that I have that's not currently in a build. But what it's going to let us do is going to give us a really good test of this cooler. So if it does a moderately good job of cooling the 5900X, in fairness, the majority of people are not going to be putting a 5900X in a budget case. You're probably going to use something like a 5600X. So if it does a moderately good job of cooling this CPU, you're going to have no worries with the 5600X. If you are wanting to go with the 5900X, SilentiumPC do offer a range of AIOs, which are probably more appropriate, and I'll put links to those in the description. But make sure you stick to the end of the video for the thermal testing, because I think the results of this are going to be quite interesting. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston's Fury Beast RGB at 3600 MHz. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 M.2 NVMe SSD for this build. It's from Sabrent, and it's their blistering fast Rocket 4 Plus in 2TB capacity. For the graphics card, I've got the ASUS ROG STRIX 3080. Powering our whole build, I'm going to be using the Montek Century Gold 850 watt fully modular power supply. The final part for today's build is some white cable extensions from CableMod, which I may or may not use in today's build. Space at the back of the case does look quite limited, but I am keen to test this out for you to see whether cable extensions will or won't fit in this case. Okay, that's all the parts. Let's get on with the build. Okay, first thing to do is get the tempered glass side panel off. It's held on with 4 thumb screws. With the thumb screws removed, we can simply lift the panel off and away. To remove our other side panel, we just need to remove the thumb screws at the back, and then we can simply slide the panel backwards and lift away. In the main body of the case, we've got our instruction manual. We've got a bag of accessories, so we've got all the screws we're going to need for the build. We've also got some cable ties for cable management, and we've got some PCIe slots. The reason we've got these is these bits at the back actually break out, and then if you want to replace them, you need to use the ones from the accessory bag. Taking a look at the rear of the case, we can see that 6 of the standoffs are already inserted. We are going to need to insert another 3 here, here, and here. So we've got the standoffs we're going to need to insert in our accessory bag. They also give you this little tool for securing them, which is good. A lot of other budget cases don't include this. So this goes over the standoff, and then you've got a standard screw at the end. You can use your normal screwdriver to screw this in. Taking a look at the rear of the case, you can see we've got our fan and ARGB hub in the middle of the case. We've got 3 fans at the front, 1 at the rear, and you can see they're all plugged into the hub already, so this is really going to simplify the setup process. We've also got plenty of space for drives in this case, so at the bottom we can fit 2 3.5-inch drives. We've also got 3 2.5-inch drive mounting locations, so we've got 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. In terms of the front I/O, we've got 2 USB Type-A ports, we've got a separate headphone and microphone jack, we've got a reset button and a power switch. Importantly, the reset button can also be used to control the lighting on the ARGB hub if your motherboard doesn't have an ARGB header, which is a great feature for a case in this price point. At the top of the case, we've also got a removable magnetic dust filter. At the bottom of the case, we've got a removable magnetic dust filter for your power supply's intake fan. We're now ready to start working our motherboard, and we're going to go ahead and install our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM all before we put the motherboard into the case. Okay, so we can go ahead and open the lever on our CPU socket. We just need to push it outwards and up to the right hand side. If you look closely at the top left hand corner of the socket, there's a little white mark, and we're going to line this up with a mark on our CPU. Okay, this is our CPU. If you look carefully at the bottom left hand corner, there's a little gold mark on it, and if I turn the CPU round over the same corner, which is now at the top of the screen, there's a gold triangle. So that's the corner we're going to need to line up with a mark on our motherboard. The other thing you'll notice is I'm holding the CPU by the sides, and that's why I don't want to damage these gold pins on the bottom of the CPU. Okay, I've got the CPU in the right orientation. I'm just going to hover it over the socket and let it fall into place. I'm just going to move it about till it falls in. Importantly, I'm not pushing it down where I can damage the pins. And just as it has done now, it's going to fall into place. And then to secure our CPU, we just need to close the lever again. Next thing to do is to install our M.2 SSD, and you're always best installing this in the top slot to get the fastest speeds. So we need to remove these two screws. There's a special screwdriver that comes with the motherboard to let you do this. And then we can go ahead and lift the heatsink off. Then we can go ahead and insert our M.2 SSD into the socket and flatten it down. And what you'll notice whenever we secure our heatsink, the same screw is going to secure the drive. Importantly, before you return the heatsink, if you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection on the back you're going to need to remove. I've used this motherboard before, that's why there's no plastic there. So we can go ahead and return our heatsink into place. We're now ready to install the RAM, so we can go ahead and open the clips. Then we go ahead and line the RAM up, making sure we've got it installed the right way round. Once we're happy it's in the right place, just some firm pressure on the top and the RAM will clip into place. We're now ready to install our CPU cooler, so we need to remove these two brackets. They're each held on with two screws. Okay, take care not to lose these. The best place to keep them is in the motherboard box, because if you ever want to sell your motherboard or change your cooler, you may well need them. Then we've got 4 of these little spacers to screw on. Then we go ahead and slide our bracket over the top, and then secure the bracket into place with 4 screws. Just in case you're wondering, this cooler is compatible with Intel's new LGA 1700 socket. There's separate mounting hardware in the box. We can then go ahead and add some thermal paste. So I like to add just a pea-sized amount to the center of the CPU. That should do. Just before we install our cooler, we can go ahead and remove the plastic protection. Then we can go ahead and lower the cooler down into place and then secure it using the screwdriver. Next I can go ahead and put our fan onto the heatsink. Importantly, there is these little rubber anti-vibration pads for each side. The ones with the holes go on the front and the flat ones go on the back of the fan. So we'll go ahead and set this in, making sure the cables are coming towards the back. Then we've got these metal clips, which we just need to go and insert through the holes in the fans. And then we can go ahead and get our fan onto the heatsink. Just a matter of pushing here to get this to clip over. And then it's the same thing on the other side. There we go. In terms of the wiring, coming from our fan, we've got a 4-pin PWM fan connector, and we've also got a splitter cable. So if you wanted to add a second fan to the other side of the heatsink, you can do this and then plug it into here, and the clips to do that are included with the cooler. So our CPU fan header's here. I'm just going to go ahead and plug this in. And then what I'm going to do is whenever the motherboard's installed in the case, I'll tuck this cable through to the back. Coming from both our fan and our heatsink, we've got 2 wires. One is a standard 3-pin 5V ARGB connector, and the other is a splitter cable. So all I'm going to do is join the 2 of them together, making sure we line them up the right way round, and then we're going to push them into place. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to route this cable through to the back and plug it into the ARGB hub on our case. So just before we put our motherboard into the case, I think we're actually going to struggle to get it in past this rear fan. So I'm just going to remove the screws so we can move the fan to the side. Then we can go ahead and slide our motherboard into the case, lining it up with the cutout at the back. Then we can go ahead and secure the motherboard into place using the screws from the accessory bag. Then we can go ahead and re-secure our rear fan into place. Then I'm going to go ahead and pass all the cables coming from our cooler through to the back. On our fan and ARGB hub, we've got one spare header here, so I'm going to go ahead and plug the cable coming from our cooler into it. Next, we've got all our case cables to plug in. These are all the cables coming from the front I/O, which are going to let them work. So we'll plug these in one by one. Okay, first up, we've got our HD audio cable. It's going to go into this header down the far left-hand side of the motherboard. So we'll bring it through. And again, take care to plug it in the right way because there's a pin missing on the header and also a hole missing on the cable. So we'll get it pushed into place and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Next is to plug our PWM fan cable coming from our hub. So we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then again pull the excess cable through to the back. Next we're going to plug in our front panel connectors. They go into this header down here in the bottom right hand side of the motherboard. Each of the headers goes into separate pins, so pay attention to the diagram in the motherboard manual so you plug them in to the right pins. Starting off with HDD LED, it's going to go into pins 1 and 2 in the bottom row, moving from the left hand side. So it's important we do plug this in the right way round, and that is with the text facing down. Our case's reset button is ready plugged into the ARGB controller in the back of the case because it's going to be used for lighting function rather than reset. If you don't want to use it for that, you can remove it and plug it into the next 2 pins in the bottom row. It doesn't matter which way it goes. Okay, moving up to the top row, again working from left to right, pins 1 and 2 are for power LED positive and power LED negative. And then the final front panel connector is the power switch. It's going to go right next to those 2 cables in the top row. And again, it doesn't matter which way it goes around. I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down. And then we'll go ahead and pull all the cables through to the back. Next, we've got our USB 3.0 cable. It's going to go into this header here. I'm going to bring it through the cutout. Line it up with the header. And push into place, and then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. Okay, so that's our case cables plugged in. If you want to use the reset switch in the top of the case to control the lighting. If you don't want to do that and you want to use your motherboard, you just need to go ahead and remove the controller. So we're going to unplug it here and unplug it here. That's going to leave us with 2 wires. One of them we're going to plug into an ARGB header on our motherboard, and the other, although it says LED switch, we can now use it as a reset switch, so we can plug it into the pins I showed you earlier on. I'm keen to test out the RGB effects on this controller, and I'll show you these later in the video. So I'm going to go ahead and plug them back into the controller. So the only additional thing we're going to need to do to set up our controller is plug this into one of the SATA power cables coming from our power supply. This is our power supply, and it's what we call a fully modular power supply because it comes without any of the cables plugged in, meaning that you're only going to need to plug the cables in that you want. So I've already gone ahead and done this. I've plugged in our 24-pin cable to provide power to our motherboard. I've plugged in 2 CPU cables to provide additional power to our CPU. I've also plugged in 3 PCIe cables. Each of the PCIe cables does come with 2 6+2-pin connectors. Our graphics card is going to require 3 of these, but I am a big believer in using separate cables if possible, and we have enough slots in our power supply to do it, particularly if you've got a power-hungry graphics card like we do. And then I've plugged in a SATA cable to power our hub. I've also gone ahead and plugged in the white cable extensions for our 24-pin connector and also our PCIe cable. I'm not planning on using them for our CPU cables. Generally, these are at the top of the case where you can't see them anyway, and it's going to help with cable management at the back. So just before we put our power supply into the case, this is our power supply's intake fan. It's important we install it facing down the way. And then we can go ahead and secure our power supply into place using the screws from the accessory bag. We can now go ahead and get our power supply cables plugged in, starting with our 2 8-pin EPS cables at the top left of the motherboard. Our 24-pin cable is going to go here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it through here, line it up with the motherboard, and push into place. Then our cable extension does have some cable combs which are going to help tidy up the cable. Next I'm just going to go ahead and plug the SATA cable coming from our ARGB hub into the SATA cable from the power supply. We're now ready to install our graphics card, so we can go ahead and remove this little bracket here. Now we're going to need to remove the cover from the second and third slot down from the top. With this case, you actually just have to break the covers off. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. As I mentioned earlier, in the accessory bag, you do have spare covers that will go back into place. So they will just slide in. And then what you'll do is you'll use a screw to hold them in place. We can then go ahead and open the clip in the top PCIe slot. And then we can go ahead and slide our graphics card into the case, lining it up with the slot. Once we're happy we've got everything lined up, we just need to apply some firm pressure to the graphics card. It's going to clip into place, and then we can go ahead and secure it at the side with 2 screws. We can then slide the bracket cover back into place and secure it using the thumb screw. I'm then going to go ahead and bring the cables from our graphics card through this little cutout, and then we can go ahead and plug them into the graphics card. The final thing to do is get all the cables tidied up so we can get the side panel back on again. Importantly, we have got some cable ties and cable tie points, and we've also got plenty of space down the bottom for our power supply cables. So that's the build complete, and I think you'll agree it looks absolutely great. I've gone ahead and set the PC up. I haven't recorded those steps because I've done that previously with this motherboard, CPU and graphics card combination. So if you need to know how to do that, you'll find a link to that video in the description. In terms of setting everything up, it's very similar to the video that you've seen. The only slight difference is in the BIOS, we've only got 2 fans to set up. And the settings I went for were just the standard fan curves monitoring the CPU temperature. And it's only the CPU fan and system fan 2 that we need to set up. So really straightforward. Going on to take a look at the temperatures, our CPU idled at 37 degrees and reached a maximum of 72 degrees while gaming. Our GPU idled at 34 degrees, reaching a maximum of 69 degrees while gaming. The noise levels were also pretty good, with the average noise at idle of 37 decibels and reaching only a maximum of 40 decibels while gaming. So I didn't go ahead and do any more CPU intensive tests, something like an AIDA64 stability test, because I didn't think that would be a fair test for our Ryzen 9 5900X. Like I said, if you're going to go with that, I would recommend using an AIO. SilentiumPC have a number of these, and there is space at the top to mount an AIO, so that would be my recommendation if you're going with the Ryzen 9. The other thing to mention is, as well as mounting additional fans at the top, there is space at the bottom where you can mount 2 fans over the power supply shroud. There's long screws included to let you do that. The only thing, if you add more fans into the build, you are potentially adding more noise, and I'm actually really happy with the PC as it is. It runs cool, but as you can see from our noise levels, it also runs quiet. So my preference at the moment would be to just go with the stock fans. If you're going with a lower powered CPU, go with the air cooler, because I think it looks absolutely great. And if you do want to go something like a Ryzen 9, then I would recommend installing an AIO up at the top, and I have plenty of videos of me installing an AIO that you should be able to modify this build guide to. So I want to give you a look at some of the case's ARGB effects. To cycle through the effects, all we need to do is press the reset button on the top of the case. So in terms of the case, I'm really impressed with it. I think it looks like a much more expensive case, probably up around the £90 mark rather than what you'd expect at £55. So at £55, it's offering incredibly good value for money, particularly when you consider the fans here are really good. You've got the built-in ARGB hub as well as the PWM hub. That's not something you would normally expect in a case costing £55. So is there anything I didn't like about the case? I don't like having to break off the brackets for the PCIe slots. And I think if they were going forward, adding removable brackets would be one thing for me that would be very important. Two other things I wasn't so keen on. One was over to the right hand side at the back of the case where you mount the SSDs. There is some cutouts there and it is possible to see the cables there. And again, I think if they were modifying the case in the future, I don't see the reason for that big area of perforation. You would be much better having that closed so you couldn't see any of the cables at the back. Maybe the only other thing I didn't like, and it was maybe a word of caution on the power supply that you're choosing, because you are going to be able to see it through the perforations at the bottom. The Montech power supply I've got is a great power supply. The only downside is the writing that's facing the top is yellow. So it does stand out when you're looking through the perforations at the bottom, particularly when you've got all the lighting set to white. So that would be my only thing, maybe not the best choice of power supply for this particular case. So it's another really positive review for SilentiumPC. I'm incredibly impressed with their budget case, but as well, the air cooler with the ARGB effects on it, I think you'll agree, are absolutely stunning. So I can definitely recommend both the case and the air cooler. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.